Hello, everyone. Today we're here to discuss a BBC TV movie that was on Amazon Prime that my family decided to watch during our prolonged self-quarantine because, again, as I always say, which is because it's true, we all have different health conditions that put us in a higher risk category, so we've been continuing to stay home. And this is called An Inspector Calls, and apparently, it did really well when it aired on BBC One in 2015 with viewership. I thought it was pretty well done. When I was watching it, I wondered, you know, this certainly seems like it's based upon a play. And a lot of it had to do with how it was written, how the characters were speaking to one another, and not just because it was back in, 1912 and that was the setting in England, but because there's just something about it. It seemed like one of those plays where it could be done like with one part of the stage just being that one room that every single scene will harken back to in the present, while all the other scenes would be ones that could be off to the side and people could spotlight, or I don't know. But it felt like one of those, where most of the play is takes place in one room, and in this case it would be, I believe, their formal dining room to celebrate the engagement of their daughter to another wealthy socialite guy. Now, that being said, this film is actually based on a play. Let me make sure I'm getting this person's name right. Okay, I could remember it was Priestley, but it is. It's written by an English dramatist, J.B. Priestley, and this is according to Wikipedia. Apparently, it is a three-act drama, and it takes place on a single night. Again, why I thought it was maybe a play. It's just how that whole dynamic would be playing out on stage in April 1912. So it focuses on an upper middle class family, the Burling family, who live in a fictional town of Bromley. And it's visited by a man calling himself Inspector Goole. Now, one of the things they kind of leave out here is that the Burling family is holding their dinner party, like I said, to celebrate the engagement of their daughter Sheila, and the festivities go wrong when Goole shows up, right? Or perhaps they go terribly right. In that, Goole comes as an inspector to announce the suicide of a local woman. And without spoiling everything, just know that there's a reason why Wikipedia references this as one of the best plays from that time. But it's also because it references it as a socialist agenda play, which it is, and which is not abnormal in most other countries except mine. And that is it's pretty telling, because when you're watching it, you can tell that that's what Priestley has going here. This is a woman that has been working at the family textile factory. And that's where the story starts, when Goole is trying to go through each person who's present at this dinner party. And let me see, there's father, the mother, their son, their daughter, and then the fiance. So there's 5 people present aside from Goole. Now, each one of these 5 people has something to do with the downward spiral and eventual collapse and suicide of the woman in question that was originally working at their textile factory. So, given that information only, you can tell that Priestley is going to have some very strong messages about how society is constructed at that time, still is, and what kind of pressures can just pile upon a single person and lead them to such dire straits. I found that to be, watching it was excruciating, but it was also necessary. In that it makes the play, I can imagine like seeing the play back in the day versus watching this movie. And this movie was very well done, the TV movie. And it forces you to face all the uncomfortable things that people normally don't want to face. And I consider that a very relevant thing, okay? There's never a time in which that is not relevant, especially right now. Okay? Black Lives Matter. And I'm just like, you nailed it. It was great. I was watching this, and the acting, everybody's acting. Every single person who is acting in this TV movie did an outstanding job. I don't really feel like any of the characters weren't believable. The set was great, and so were their costumes. The pacing was absolutely fine. It felt very much like if you were reading perhaps a little, exactly like that, a little theater, like a little, and actually like a stage play, right? Like the little, I can words, the script, okay? Or you're reading like a little novelette kind of thing. It would be like that, a very, just leisurely read, but a very intense one given the subject matter. It does get graphic at the end because, again, this does involve a suicide. And what's fascinating is partway through the movie, well, actually, I'm going to put this in the spoiler bit. So this is an inspector calls, not when. I always want to say when an inspector calls. It's an inspector calls. And it's on Amazon Prime. And it's just, it's not believable in that I don't feel like somebody would go out of their way to figure out why a woman who's like homeless would commit suicide. So, I mean, that's really cynical and dark of me to say that, but also unfortunately realistic. Okay. I wish that wasn't so. Anyway, so I'm going to actually say one of the things that, again, it was one of those things where I was watching and I went, I think maybe there's more to this inspector than we think as the viewer. Because again, I also was like, okay, this is in 1912. Everything sounds like it was written back then when people actually wrote like that. And there's no rip on today's language, but just like, that's, you know. And I was thinking about what was popular then, because certain types of things were popular then, like spiritualism or allegorical storytelling. So I'm going to have a spoiler. I highly encourage you to watch this. If you're interested in things that are kind of mind-bending, or like one of those, like everyone's in a room and you're like, you know, watching somebody stick it to rich people, okay? It's one of those. And I don't know about you, but given the fact that my country, the United States, freaking reopened, and I'm in Las Vegas, and people reopened and they didn't require people to wear masks, and now there's like over 400 cases of COVID a day for the last few days. And I've just been like, I just watching it go up, and I've been like, you know, I would really like to not believe we have to wear those too, but unfortunately, given the fact that I've had medical condition my whole life, I tend to take what a doctor says seriously, unlike a lot of people, it seems like here. So anyway, I guess my whole point is the greed is what's forced a lot of things to reopen. It's not because of your liberty. They don't give a it's naive to think the government, especially in my country, gives a crap about your liberty, okay? It has to do with making sure their stock market doesn't collapse or their precious banks don't, okay? It has nothing to do with you. Now that is my cynical ass coming through. And you're free to disagree with me. After all, that's, you know, I'm not going to freaking mind control your ass into thinking the way I do. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just say that. That's, you know, if you're in the mood to be like, you know, this kind of sucks, and rich people should kind of get theirs, this is that movie for you, okay? If you're in that mood. So my spoiler is going to be in just a second, okay? So if you enjoyed my little talk about this, please know, again, like I've said in my previous videos, I usually have more in-depth talks. I'm trying to work on summing it up more so y'all aren't stuck here forever with me just yapping my lips, okay? And yeah, like usually screenshots and things from the film. Again, if I have the editing spoons, if you don't know what spoons are in chronic illness or chronic pain, go Google it. Spoonie life. I will make sure that that's edited in there, but it may not be. So, and yeah, so there's spoiler time right now. You ready? Spoiler time. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So there was something wrong with Inspector Ghoul at some part of the movie. At some point, I was looking and I was like, there's something amiss here. There was just the way that character was acting. It was almost like the family members sometimes forgot he was there. Now, you could argue that it had to do with the trauma of being questioned, which is perfectly reasonable. However, he seemed almost spectral, like a specter. And that would not quite, but almost be a play on words in English, right? An inspector calls. All you'd have to do is change the last bit of inspector with a few different letters, and it would really be a specter calls. And the farther along he got in questioning each member of this wealthy family, and the knowledge that he gained, even though he had the journal and he had a photo of her, seemed rather uncanny. It just seemed like, well, there's no way. Maybe she did really write all of that detail down, but it just seemed like a lot. And yeah, so of course, after he leaves, Inspector Ghoul leaves at some point, right? After he's made them feel adamantly guilty. However, that didn't last long, because the moment that he left, it wasn't them confronting the horrific things that they've done to her, having grown any sort of a conscience or empathy or anything of the sort. It had much more to do with them finding all the different excuses they could possibly have to rationalize their behavior and once again shift the blame upon the poor person. Does that sound familiar? So, given that was their attitude after Inspector Ghoul left, the head of the household goes and calls the police department, because of course he does, because of course he has people on the take, because of course he does. And it's heavily insinuated he does. And at least in the movie. And it turns out that no one has been reported committing a suicide like that. And he goes, oh, see, he was just yanking our chain. He had us going, and so they're cheerful and they're back to having their little, dinner and have to celebrate their daughter's engagement and the uniting of those two wealthy families that run big money businesses, And then you realize that she hasn't committed suicide yet. Because this inspector, I just got goosebumps, because this inspector is heavily insinuated to be death. And he is. And so you see her, and she's right the way it was described, and she's getting ready to drink. Probably lie, or something like that, which is a horrible way to die. Not recommending any such thing. I do not sponsor such behavior, but that's people's business. But that is, I'm not going to judge somebody if they did. It's terrible though. That's whole thing is just awful. Okay, it's awful. It's not too graphic, but it's graphic enough, showing how she dies, that if you have a sympathetic bone in your body, thinking about that, about what kind of desperation would drive somebody to do that to themselves, okay? That is a very powerful ending. And that's not the complete ending, because we see the inspector there after she leaves this world, right? And you can tell he cared about her, which is interesting. The idea of basically the Reaper actually caring enough about people who society views as the least of us to go out of his way to try and make something not happen. Did the rich people use that information to try and stop it? Did they use it to try and realize that they needed to change their ways? No. They went on with their dinner party. Now, to the son's credit, he goes and does decide he does need to go look for her. But before he leaves the estate, they get a phone call from the department back, from the police department. Even though there's no inspector on record with Inspector Gould's name, they get that phone call. And that phone call says, a woman matching that description has just committed suicide of this. And they realize they all in trouble. But they also still haven't learned their lesson because they're still coming up with a way to get out of it. And that is An Inspector Calls, a 2015 TV movie for BBC One. Powerful stuff. So, lot to contemplate. Pretty heavy, but important nonetheless. So, again, like I said in my prior movie, I'm looking forward to Dark Season 3 coming out. The End of the Devabad trilogy, which is a book also that I'm looking forward to by S.A. Chakraborty. And I am just amazed at people's ability to storytell. So, humbled by it, really, actually. So I really recommend that if you are interested in any such thing, or even though you've listened to me talk about the spoiler, that you still want to feel that whole experience for yourself and understanding how it was told. And what I mean when you can tell that it was probably originally a stage play where there's that one room and then there's all the different the scenes that maybe people would spotlight to or something of that nature. I don't actually know that's what they did. But it reminded me of a play once I saw when I was younger, like really young. I can't remember the name of it. It was like that. So, yeah, thanks for sticking with me. This is Kelly with Eclectic Entries, and I do talks about TV movies, Netflix, Crunchyroll, probably eventually soon Funimation. I'm actually really on Amazon Prime, which this is on, and I really have enjoyed rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender and Cardcaptor Sakura on Netflix, because Cardcaptor Sakura, like, oh my gosh, I grew up with both of those things, but especially that. And again, eventually I want to make an entire movie just about Clamp and that mangaka group, all-female mangaka group, because they're amazing. Anyway, until then, take care as you're able, okay?